When was the first time that you thought to yourself, I want to fly Blackhawk helicopters?
Oh, that's a great question, Jared. I think there's probably two answers to that. Only one of them I remember, but the first time I remember, I had joined the Army. Thought that would be a good idea. Shortly after GWAC, the Global War on Terrorism kicked off in the early 2000s, and I was a private. I was learning how to do my job somewhere in Georgia, um, and I just heard this loud sound outside of my barracks where I was at. And I remember just looking through the windscreen and being like, huh, holy moly, that's the biggest helicopter I've ever seen. I didn't even know they made them that big. Um, and see, I was like, man, that would be really cool if I could do something like that. And there was actually a buddy of mine, one of my battle buddies, in my room. He's like, those are Army pilots, right? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, Army guys don't fly stuff. That's the Air Force, right? And he's like, no, those people are in the Army, just like you. And I was like, man, I really chose the wrong job, but I think I'm going to do whatever I got to do to figure out how to become an aviator. And then, it was kind of a long, winding road, but it took me about 6 years from that moment to get through college, become an officer, find somebody who is an aviator, figure out how to branch it, as we say. But yeah, that's the one I remember. The other one that I don't remember, funny enough, I got back from a deployment in Afghanistan, and I was at my dad's house, and he was like, boxing up all these old toys from when we were kids and stuff like that. And he it was him or my brother had showed me like, oh, here's these wings or whatever. This looks like something, you might like to have. And it was like toy Army Aviator wings that were like clip on. And I was like, no way. Um, so while I'm definitely not a fatalist at heart, but I was like, wow, that is pretty serendipitous. So all these years later, decades later, to be doing that.
Yeah, fascinating. So, what does someone like me? I have absolutely no idea what it takes to train for something like that. Tell me and other people who have no idea, which is probably the majority of the population out there, what sort of skills does it take to get to the level that you're at? And maybe can you explain a little bit about like what you do when you fly those, like what that's like, and what are the missions? What do we need to know about that?
Oh yeah. Okay. What does it take? Well, it takes a lot of discipline, is what it takes. Folks that go through flight school with the Army, that's normally anywhere from 15 months to a couple years, depending on what your helicopter that you will ultimately fly is, right? Because we have a few. It's a lot of discipline. I tell folks it's like going to grad school and never leaving. I give you these big old stack of books and with a bunch of regulations and got to learn about aerodynamics and how am I going to apply it. And, airplanes, they want to fly. Um, I've flown airplanes a little bit too, but helicopters are a whole different ball game. You're moving in all axes at a time. So I think the first time you fly, for most people, they fly a helicopter the first 8 to 10 hours. And we say you got to find the hover button because you need about a football field to figure out how to just hold that thing in place. So it just takes a lot of discipline, a lot of study, and you can't quit. And if you don't quit, I would say, we probably have upwards of 90% of folks who start flight school finish nowadays. And as long as you're willing to keep your head in the books, and stay disciplined 5, 6 days a week, sometimes flying every day and then going to academics the other half of the day, you'll make it through and you'll learn just enough to be dangerous, we say, by the time you graduate flight school and then get there. And then you got to learn how to become a mission aviator. Right. And so I think that takes years. At least I know in my own experience. I mean, it was probably 4 years from the time I started flying before you would get in the aircraft and you just felt really prepared and like, yeah, I've got this thing. Like I know exactly what I'm doing about all these things I've got, and you become the senior pilot in the aircraft, right? And you're running it next to some other pilot. But until then, sometimes it can feel like there's a lot of training wheels on you with the senior pilots, but it's all about safety. So I've been flying for or an aviation officer now for almost 15 years. Um, so it's great. Yeah, you just gotta not quit.
So what's the unique role that like a Blackhawk helicopter plays? Like why do they call that in to play whatever role? And like, can you give us examples of the sorts of things that like you've done in your experience?
Yeah,
Maybe like a couple highlight moments or something to give us an
yeah, sure.
understanding of like what's what's it like? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So a Blackhawk helicopter, we call it UH-60, right? So it's a utility helicopter. It can carry 11 soldiers in the back of the aircraft, right, with all the seats in. You can sling load, so that's when we carry something under the aircraft, up to 9,000 pounds. And it can fly really far, really fast. So we use it for a lot of different mission sets, right? And when you're in flight school, they actually talk to you about that. Hey, choose the mission, not the helicopter, right? Choose the mission, something you like. So some examples say, right, you can do everything from the type of stuff you think about in the movies where, you're taking the good guys to some bad folks and landing, right next to compounds and houses, and we call those air assaults. Um, Time sensitive target missions, vehicle interdictions with those things, sniper, I've flown with snipers in the back of the aircraft, right? Where they're um, engaging stuff all the way till, hey, we're just moving people and cargo around, right? Because people still got to move. So folks will refer to us as a taxi. Maybe a general's got to get somewhere and needs to go um, meet with some key leaders in some region or in a particular country, right? You do those missions too. Uh, I think, one of the great things about Blackhawk, Chinook helicopters, as well as just the diversity of the mission set here in the States, hurricane relief, right? Those kinds of things, or just any natural disaster. Hey, Igor Sikorsky said it, right? Like an airplane can fly by and wave at you and drop something to you, but a helicopter can land and save your life. Um, so those kind of things, I just think make it very rewarding, and obviously medical evacuation, right? On top of that, so just a breadth of different roles that aircraft can play. Uh, so I've really enjoyed that, and been very fortunate to get to do just about all of them.
Okay, and so for for most of the audience, the listeners and the viewers, they don't know. You and I were doing graduate work in philosophy at Texas A&M
Uh,
together,
yeah,
and
gig
it
'em.
was gig 'em. And I mean, we were sitting there in some sort of seminar. I don't remember what it was, and I knew that you were in the military, but you sort of like casually mentioned that like you had been flying, you had already flown Blackhawk helicopters. I was going, okay, so I got to put two and two together here and just go, you were doing that, and then somehow a philosophy master's degree came into the picture. I was in a PhD, you were doing a master's, and there were some other students obviously as well. So can you take us through, you mentioned college, and then I guess like flight school, military came after that. So what was the timeline of, maybe let's take it from college to like military career, and then at some point the decision, hey, I want to do a master's in philosophy of all things. What was the transition there?
Yeah, I think it's pretty apparent, Jared, why I would have. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's definitely not necessarily a natural path. So college, right? Undergrad was psychology and neuroscience, and to join the Army, you have a bachelor's in just about anything. If you want to be an officer, you just got to go through a commissioning source as well, like ROTC or West Point, one of the military academies. So I did that, commissioned as an aviator, second lieutenant in December 2010. Um, Went and got stationed at a few places, deployed a couple times. And I was finishing up being what's called a company commander at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in the 82nd Airborne. And I was fortunate enough to uh, get what we call a broadening assignment to go work for the commanding general there of the 82nd Airborne Division. So while I was doing that for a year and trying to figure out my life and whether I wanted to pursue special operations aviation or some other future of my military, uh, mentor of mine, Tim Leone, outstanding infantry officer, who's actually still at Fort Bragg, was working and on that third floor there at the 82nd Airborne Division headquarters, and he had taught at West Point, and he knew I was discerning a lot of potential futures, and so he knew that I had thought about, hey, one day after the Army, I might want to be a teacher, right? I might want to teach something. I have a natural curiosity about life and really all things. Definitely the person that's always asking questions, even when somebody would rather a question not be asked, probably. And he had taught in the philosophy department there at West Point, and so he just asked me, hey, you talk about wanting to go to grad school. There's all these grad school programs in the Army. Um, we want to broaden you. Have you thought about teaching at West Point? And I'll be honest, I hadn't, because I was ignorant of the program at the time, and I assumed you had to be a graduate of West Point to go teach at West Point, which was not the case at all. Come to find out, so very fortunate. Interviewed, was selected for that for the graduate degree program, and but for the folks who are just unfamiliar with the military, when you're about a decade into being an officer, you have this interesting time in your career where you have a few years where you can go broaden, and they want you to go outside of your branch, for a little bit, or expose yourself to something else. In the hopes that that's going to sharpen you um, to be a leader at higher tactical levels someday, or even potentially strategic level leader one day, right? So there's actually a lot of value to them in pursuing graduate education. I'd be lying if I said I knew the statistic off the top of my head, but the amount of military officers that have graduate degrees, particularly in the Army, it's astronomical, right? We do put a high price on continuing to educate oneself and challenge assumptions and challenge, your way of thinking. So you stay adaptable, you stay flexible, you keep your mind sharp. I talked to him about, my curiosity, things I was interested in. I had taken some undergraduate philosophy classes, and he was like, man, this is right up your alley. Like, you've got to do this. So, I wrote a couple papers, applied to A&M, was super fortunate that they took a chance on me, and that West Point did. And I went and studied ethics there in the program. And it was great.
That's awesome. And so, yeah, I mean, you mentioned this already, but like I guess you have this natural, I mean, I know you well enough, but like you have a natural affinity to ask questions, to think critically, I mean, like, has that been sort of like a lifelong characteristic of yours? I assume there was a
Mm.
lot of precedent leading up to it. You are the kind of person who asks questions. There's a natural gifting there. There's sort of like a way of seeing life, and like, the broad questions kind of way. So that was leading into the decision of philosophy. I imagine maybe there were some other topics or disciplines in the mix, or no?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I, I had thought about potentially applying to the behavioral sciences and leadership program at West Point as well. I'm pursuing a master's, in my undergraduate field. Uh, but what drove me towards philosophy um, was the rigor of what I was doing and what I wanted to pursue. And so, you know me a little bit, but like fitness is a huge part of my life. And that's not just because I'm in the military. It just is. I think it's tremendously important to the health of the mind, actually, too, right? And so, being a philosopher, studying philosophy is much like that, right? Like it can have an addictive quality to it, but when you walk out of a 3 hour seminar in grad school, just critically examining um, a particular subject, I mean, you feel spent. You feel like your brain is mush. And I love that because even if I was walking out with more questions than I had answers, um, I knew that I was sharpening my mind. And that's so important as a military officer. We get paid to lead units, to lead people in very ambiguous uh, situations, a lot of times that you have to navigate. And so understanding who you are, understanding what principles um, you operate from, understanding your positions on things. I was researching the potential for lethal autonomous weapon systems and when we ought not to employ these things, researching, hey, at what level do we kind of imbue responsibility to junior enlisted soldiers to be able to make life or death decisions, right? Those kinds of things. But when you grapple with those things um, at such a high level for so long, um, again, to me, it's like lifting weights, right? Like when I was 18, I wasn't benching 225, but you're striving for it and you go back and you try and and nowadays you go put 135 on the bar and it feels like nothing, right? It's the same thing with making decisions and being able to practice thinking slow so you can think and act quickly when you need to, uh, with confidence that, yes, I am comfortable with what the outcome of that is going to be. Because there's all these premises that I'm operating from inside of my head that are part of this argument that are just germane to me now. Right. So, uh, yeah, there were several conversations with Tim Leone, though, that just drove me more and more to think that philosophy and then wanting to engage with folks on hard, di difficult subjects that I knew would challenge me in grad school, right? None of you, I mean, and I don't mean this flippantly, but none of you necessarily care that, oh, here's this military. You don't know me as a commander. You don't know me as anyone other than John sitting in class, right? And so, um, with that comes a level of, yeah, I just don't think that's right. That you guys could tell me, you'd be like, yeah, I think you have that completely wrong. And challenge me, and you don't you don't always hear that. The more senior you get as a military officer, people aren't as candid with you, right? They're like, ah, yeah, that's great, sir. Sweet. Let's go. Yep. Awesome. Um, so that was what drove me that direction as opposed to a research route uh, in psychology. So
Yeah, I can verify that there are pretty much no yes men or women in philosophy and in the
yeah,
philosophy in particular, but also like the grad program. Like, everything that you say, everything that you argue for, it's going to come under some scrutiny in a good way. And just like you said, that's a good thing. And I've been thinking about, you mentioned a little bit, but it's just not a natural application to say, or it's not a natural sort of like pairing to, philosophy and the military. You mentioned a
Yeah.
couple ways that it does absolutely apply, but how are you thinking about what you were doing and its application for, I guess it goes both, you were probably thinking about situations that you had been in and how what you're learning, applied to those sorts of situations, seeing those in a new way, but also how you're going to take what you're learning in these classes, the logic, the ethics, maybe the epistemology, the how we know, study of knowledge,
Yeah.
that sort of thing. When you look back, how do you see the application of what you were learning, I guess, like backwards and forwards from that time?
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I've done a lot of thinking on this, right? Um, to me, it's the habits of mind. So, I mean, we could apply this to anything today, right? Whether that's from scrolling on a social media feed, to scrolling on Apple News or whatever news folks consume, um, to, like I said a little bit previously, and that's folks, tend to come to you with complex problems, right? And then they go, "Sir, ma'am, I've thought a lot about this, and I'm at the point where I need you, to help me navigate this situation," right? Um, I think most importantly, um, I'm not a commander right now, right? Because the next level of command would be battalion command. But I think about how this would apply as a battalion commander, where a staff brings you three different courses of action for a complex problem. And at the end of that, and you may only have 2 hours ever to touch this problem set. And the decision you make is going to affect hundreds of people's lives. Can you see through what's being briefed to you? Um, Follow the logic train to get to the conclusion that they're getting to, or see that they think they're arriving at a proposed course of action that's complete, but it's not, right? We've gone from A to B to Z, and there was a lot in between we missed. And so maybe you got to look somebody in the face and give them the hard, hey, we're going to relook this and we're going to do this again. And so looking back now, I think what it's allowed me to do is slow down a little, think a little more about things that come to me, preserve decision space. When I go, you know what, I need to go think about this a little bit more. Um, and that's super important. And the CG, that the commanding general that I worked for at the 82nd Airborne Division, he would say this all the time. He would say, we just never preserve enough time to think. It's just meeting after meeting, decision after decision, right? And so that was right prior to me going to grad school and teaching and all of this. And so, I was very fortunate to be pretty successful in my first decade as an officer. And part of that was because I was very decisive. I was very confident. I was very, problem. Okay, boom, answer. Here we go. But I was operating that dial on a 10 to 12 all the time, and being able to go, hey, I can find some other gears. I can find some other parts of this dial, to go where actually we need to peel that back a little bit. I don't know that we've thought hard enough about this problem, because we can't just wave this one away, right? So that's one thing. How do we remain decisive, but maintain some habits of mind and cultivate some habits of mind that allow us to truly think critically, that allow us as a commander. I would say if you could be a fly on the wall, a lot of commanders, they cannot help themselves in a brief, to not interrupt all the time. When they see a little bitty thing they want to comment on, right? How do we become better active listeners, right? Part of being a philosopher is being a good listener, whether we're reading something or whether we're having a conversation with somebody. So that's been a huge help in application. And then I think, directly applying to the military in, I would say, very stressful situations, and maybe leaning more towards those combat situations that folks may experience sometimes, is how do I gain some perspective in the middle of a very tough problem set, right? Most people can't let go of the problem as they're in it, and as they're experiencing it. They can't imagine competing pressures. They can't pull themselves out of the pressure of time for a few minutes to see the decision that's ahead of them in a more sober light. They're caught up in the emotion of it, right? And I think particularly military officers, you have to be able to not disconnect, but make some space to make the hard decision. And it can't simply be emotive and all passionate. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself never making a decision for want of disappointing somebody or it being the wrong one. And we just don't have that luxury all the time.
Yeah, that I totally agree. And you mentioned your particular areas of research that you were doing
Yeah.
when you were doing your master's, and I'm wondering, so I mean, fascinating topics. So, what were sort of the like main questions that you were asking with those couple
Mm,
topics? And did you land on either a commitment, a conclusion, or were you sort of marking the territory of like these are maybe some good ways to think about this problem? And what was your approach to those research questions?
yeah, great. Um, yeah, so my research was exploring autonomy, free will. How do we understand? That's a word that gets thrown out there a lot nowadays, related to machines and related to AI, right? Um, well, I may not be the biggest Kant fan. I do think uh, he had some, kind of that was a lot of the seminal stuff he was exploring, right? Is human autonomy, and so I was asking questions, particularly as we see drones proliferate, of all kinds, on the ground, under the sea, in the air, and we think about the people that are behind those machines, right? And as there's this potential to move away from how many people are behind that machine, or how many people per number of them, right? And how much do we want to cede uh, to a machine to making life or death decisions? So that was a lot of what I was taking a look at, and then I was exploring, some of the history of that and how have we handled that as a military. I think some of the great things about technology in the 20 years that I've been in the Army is that it has created a lot of efficiency. But I think a lot of what it has done is also enabled um, commanders at much higher echelons uh, to consume data at a very low tactical level, and reach down and make decisions. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's good. In the case that I was looking at, sometimes not always, and it can be confusing, right? Particularly when we're thinking about not just autonomy and that free will and how we apply it, making life and death decisions related to, um, you know, remote engagements, uh, but where responsibility lies and who takes responsibility, right? When that thing's done right or wrong. So I explored some of that, and then we get into some of Jonathan Shea's like moral injury, right? When a person's kind of made to do something, right? But they have the best information, but they're not trusted with that information, even though they're the ones that are in the best position to make the decision to act at the time. So yeah, it was hard for a while to nail down what direction my thesis was going to go, because I just wanted to. There were so many things that were so fascinating in seeing uh, a military at the time in 2019 that was just looking at an exceptional time of transformation on the horizon. And then we go into, the war in Ukraine while I'm teaching at West Point, and now it's 2025, and some of those things that I was thinking about when you couldn't find 80 articles on anything related to it at that time. Now there's tens of thousands, and it's something that we're going to have to continue to just really think hard about. And so that was a lot of, as somebody who knew that I was going to be eventually going back to the active military, the field, back in a tactical unit, right? These things had real import into the future that I was looking at. So, ultimately, not just my research, but the research of others helped to inform some of those principles that Secretary of Defense ultimately published on lethal autonomous weapon systems. What red lines are we going to draw? And hey, we're using this word autonomy, but in fact, we are going to define it out differently than a human, and understand that we always want the ability to govern this thing in some way, shape, or form, and that it's not, free will, free thinking being like we want to make it, right? So, yeah.
Good. And so you defend your thesis, and
Yeah.
you start teaching at West Point soon after. Can you take us through that transition? And I mean, what it was like to step on that campus, and maybe if you could give, again, people like me and people who aren't familiar, when I hear West Point, I just have this imagery, like, held in very high regard, high caliber, high quality across the board. A lot of history to it. But I'm not as familiar, obviously, with how it stands in the military, its history, and I guess particularly the philosophy department, the philosophy program there. So
Yeah.
it's a lot there, but can you sort of unpack those stages for us?
Yeah, great. So I get to West Point. It's summer 2021. COVID is full on, and we're teaching in the classroom, but everybody's still masked up, right? But interesting time to be teaching there in the philosophy department. So going there, like I said, I was not a student at West Point. I wasn't a cadet at West Point. I went to Texas State University for my undergrad and did the ROTC program there. So West Point is one of the service academies, right, for the United States. So it is particular to the Army. So you've got about 1,200 cadets per class, high school seniors that are going to graduate and join every single year. And so you've got 4 classes at one time, right, that are there, from freshmen to seniors. And so very similar to a private liberal arts college in terms of size of the amount of folks that are going there. It's probably one of the most gorgeous places in the United States. It's set right along the Hudson River. I snapped pictures in my office when I left, because I had a corner office at the top of Lincoln Hall overlooking the Hudson River, right next to Trophy Point, which, they call the $1 million view. And it's simply amazing. And I think it's a shame a lot of the cadets miss out on the beauty of that place, because we keep them so busy with so many other things while they're there. But yeah, very interesting, right? Like they're there pretty much 365, 24/7, unless they're out training or doing a summer academic internship abroad or studying abroad for a semester. They live in their barracks, so they're, which is very similar to a dormitory, much more managed. There's not a lot of dirty rooms, the messy rooms there at West Point. Um, and yeah, no, so it was great. So you've got all these. I'll tell you what, it's the perfect college experience for a professor if you're somebody who's teaching there, because there's not a lot of not turning work in. There's not a lot of showing up to class late. There's not a lot of, oh, I might get that in next week. That final that was due 2 weeks ago, so I was pretty blessed in that regard in terms of teaching. But yeah, if you're a student at Cadet or if you were teaching there, a lot of people don't know it's about 50% of the faculty is actually our civilian professors, just like you, Jared. So they are kind of the permanent faculty there, right? And then you've got the other half that are what we call junior rotating faculty. So those who have a master's or maybe just got their PhD, young majors, senior captains, and they're there. We call them rotating faculty because they know they're going to go back out to the field. And they're there normally teaching, about 3 years. And then you have PhDs who are military. We call them academy professors, and they're there for the rest of their career once they're a lieutenant colonel or colonel. So, I taught there as a major, but, there's applications for me to apply and go back, finish my PhD, go to grad school for a few more years, and then I would essentially transition to being a full-time academy professor, and could continue to do that to the age of 62, and still be on the active roles and all that stuff. So it's a pretty eclectic place, with all the different personalities and things that you get to experience. And as you alluded to, Jared, there's so much history, and you really feel that when you walk around. You feel that in the classrooms, the way you run the classroom. Though technology certainly gets a vote, and we get to do some pretty cool stuff, a lot of the ways that the classroom, the academic schedule goes is similar to how they were doing it 200 years before. And so just feel immensely blessed to have had that opportunity. But to get to your other question, yeah, you show up and you teach a 4-4 load and maybe a little more. So so that coupled with, obviously lesson planning, all those other things that come along with it. You can work any of the 24 hours in a day you want. So
I can imagine. And so, I'm obviously used to just civilian college
mhm,
teaching at that level.
yeah,
Can you describe, like, what would be the differences between
yeah.
just sort of ordinary university and the kinds of things that you were talking about, the kinds of questions that the students were asking? Like, how do you compare
Oh
those two?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, believe it or not, significant amount of diverse views, right? So I would actually start with a similarity in that, most folks would think a military academy. Okay, so you've got all these hard charging, just young. Hey, I want to be president one day or a senator or, command an army. Um, and while there's a lot of that that's true, right? The way the academy is set up is that those undergraduate students come from every state and territory that the United States has in every new class, right? So there's a limited number of spots per state and area that you come from, and their congressional appointments, and all that. So it is quite interesting, and I think it's interesting for the students because uh, a lot of the freshmen they're asking many of the same questions any other undergraduate student would be asking in a philosophy class. Now, primarily, I taught juniors, and so by that time, they've formally made a commitment to the military, right? They're coming into the class that I taught, this core ethics course, and they're staring down. Some of these things we're talking about could be real in their life one day, particularly as we started getting towards the end of the course, because most of the course isn't related to the military at all. It's, hey, how do we create an argument? How do we analyze and examine an argument, and challenge it? How do we recognize those logical fallacies and everyday common, conversation like you and I are having, um, so that we don't get tugged around by the nose by everything that we're reading. And then we get to the application point where we get to the military. So, in terms of differences, they're obviously thinking of, man, one day um, I might have to go to combat. And so they want to ask you, and that's why, the faculty is not all civilian or all military, but they want somebody who's had some recent experience to come teach there that can not only has a foundation in that discipline, the academic discipline, but has the experience, and they can put those two together and be candid with students about how they experience something. So naturally, a lot of questions um, about combat. Oh, how did you make a decision in a split second flying a helicopter and like, we're going to engage this person, we're not going to engage this person. Well, I've only experienced that a handful of times. Like those are things that they actually challenged me to like reflect a little bit on that, and where my mind was at in the moment. We bring in guest speakers, right? Particularly those, um, one that I'm thinking of where there was what we call a bad shot within Apache. Um, there was a Reuters article sometime back. Guy pulls up a camera, looks a whole lot like an RPG, right? And so we actually have them watch that video, the gun tape from that, and pause it and go, all right, you're the aviator right now. Um, you just saw everything they saw, and I'm even going to pause it for you. What would you do, and why? Because you got to understand that you're making a permanent decision right now, or not. And can you live with, well, if that person goes, are they out on the streets again that next day? And guess what? And I talked about this in some of my research, right? Like, your Mark One eyeball, I call it, or the, we paid millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars for sophisticated technology that can zoom in on a lot of things. It only gets so clear, right? You're not going to have a perfect picture. So you got to navigate the gray. It's not always black and white. What do you got to do? And yeah.
And that's literally something that you'd be talking about in class
Yeah,
as you're teaching, like that sort of thing.
absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
about as applicable as you can get, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah. And right. And going to be clear, those conversations were never to get them to what I thought the right answer is. I mean, don't get me wrong. We talked about it, objectivism, in the classroom, and relativistic thing. I started, but that was lesson one. But 4 months later, you're talking about these things, and yeah, it was not to get them to where I was, but it goes back to the habits of mind, right? Trying to judge at that point, um, or examine whether these students are truly like navigating these things well. Um, and or some of them would have moments where they would come up to you after class. It would be like, yeah, and they've watched that video and they're like, wow, that I saw somebody died in that video. um I don't know if I can do that, right? And it becomes so much more than, right, potentially outside the classroom, where um there's a big mentorship aspect to teaching at West Point, right? It's not all about it in the classroom. A lot of it goes outside the classroom, and they're coming to your office during office hours, and they're chatting with you about that thing, and you can lead them down to explore a bunch of other stuff, right? And you hope that one day they look back on some of that and are able to draw something from it at a time where they need to.
It's, for me, obviously, I'm PhD in philosophy. I've thought this way my whole life, but it's interesting that at a place like West Point, they've chosen to include philosophy. And I'm wondering, did you get while you were there, were you able to get a sense of just the student body's perception of this discipline, where
Hmm.
I can imagine that first impression, I'm at West Point, I got to take a philosophy class, like, and maybe that's my ignorance speaking, but I can imagine at least some students going, really, is this going to help me in the long run? Because a lot of students think that way. But like, what was the sense from the students of the perception of this discipline that can, for some people, seem so removed and actually not applicable in some ways?
Yeah. Yeah, it varied, right? There were many students who were just like, particularly in the first third of the class, where you're teaching them logic, inductive versus deductive reasoning, walking them through modus ponens, and they're like, I could not be more bored with what we're talking about right now. Like, holy moly. Um, yeah, most of them live for that, probably that last third of the course. But uh, yeah, no, there's a lot of them that they're like, their perception of the military is the only way we make decisions, the only way we navigate hard stuff is I've got to be 100% confident. I've got to know everything. I've got to whatever, and I've got to make it in the moment, and it's just it's right or it's wrong. Um, and so I don't think they naturally they don't all buy into the idea that like, hey, we can ask questions. There's also make no mistake about it, like in the military I would say there's times for asking questions, there's times for not, right? Um, and so, and that's not to say that you want to be a non-thinking individual. Again, that's what everybody gets paid to do in the military, right? It's what something that I think makes the United States military unique. So much trust we put in every person. But no, they're not a lot of them initially bought into it. But then you get them through the end of the course and they write something by the end of that course that has navigated one of those difficult subjects. And you get a handful of them that are in there talking to you about it. By the time I see them is well past when they've made a decision about what their major is going to be. Um, but, but yeah, um, still many of them that walk away and go, and this is great. Um, because I can see how it can apply, right? Those habits of mind, those stepping back a little bit, examining the problem, um, not getting caught up in my own ego of thinking I've got it all figured out, right? Because I've got some other stuff figured out in this other subject area. I'm crushing it. I know I've got this. So it's good, right? And you kind of hammer home to them that not everything at least I did. Not everything can come from your own experience either, right? It's got to come from understanding the experience of others, understanding, and you know, exploring something you thought you've got figured out. And I'll tell you that made a lot of cadets uncomfortable when they read things, and something makes sense and it follows a nice logical train, and they're like, oh, and it hits at something foundational maybe, and there were a lot of good conversations with cadets there too. I didn't wander into philosophy simply from talking to Tim Leone. I mean, I'll say it. I'm one of the philosophers who's got a pretty big religious background, and I'm okay with saying that. And I read some Aquinas and all those kinds of things, right? Um, and so you can have some conversation with some of those students too, where they think their whole perception is shattered, and you're like, nah, man, you got to read more. You just don't have a strong enough foundation to grapple with that conversation with somebody, right? Like, you are not ready to enter that arena. You thought you were, but you are not in a particular conversation. and that should drive you, right, to just always try and understand more and never stop asking questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I I could talk 4 more hours on the West Point phase, but I do
Yeah,
want to hear.
sure.
So, when during that phase, was there a time where you needed to make a decision to either like extend, or where was
Mm,
the decision point where you're like, okay, it's time to move on to where you are now?
yeah. So I came there knowing that there were a certain amount of years that I was going to teach. And so really there's a couple decision points, but the big one is when you're getting ready to leave, right? You're getting ready to go back out to the field and do that normal, the routine thing you did. But at that next level now as a field grade officer, we would say, um, and you've got an opportunity to express your interests and, hey, would you want to come back and teach at the next level, or potentially be an academy professor, or something of that nature. I was always pretty straightforward with my department when I got there, and knowing, hey, I'm an operational person, um, and I'm going to give this everything I've got for the few years that I'm here. Um, but that was the long term path I want to pursue while I'm still in the military. Now, is there a path maybe later in life where I'm coming back to the teaching realm? Like, I surely hope so. But as far as the military, for me, I knew I wanted to take these things now, and see if I could bring them back into my career field, and influence some younger officers and challenge them to think. And some of the folks that have worked with and for me, definitely gotten their money's worth out of me, and asking them and challenging them, and helping us hopefully be better a little bit. But yeah, right when you leave is an opportunity, and then as you actually, while you're back out in the field like I am right now, there's another opportunity where folks will start reaching back out and saying, okay, well, you've almost finished the stuff that you have to do as a major within your branch. You've got a couple more years. Do you want to come back? Um, as I said, I'm staying to the operational path, but a really good buddy of mine uh, is likely going back to the department, and is gonna should be applying to grad school soon, and to go back and finish his PhD, and it's just, I'm super excited for him and all those folks. And to be honest, it is tremendously difficult to go back, because you've got 25 to 40 folks, depending on the size of the department, that are junior rotating faculty like I was. And you can maybe bring back like two of those folks, right? Um, and we had some very, very, very passionate philosophers, junior rotating faculty. Uh, and I mean, they are the right people to do that long term. And I'm like I said, as much as I think there could be a future post Army someday, for me, I'm I'm right where I want to be, and I think all those conversations that I've talked about being able to have, and um, talking about duty and talking about virtue ethics and all those conversations, you can still have those. Um, and for some of them, it doesn't even feel, they don't even know they're participating in philosophy. You know what I mean? And I think there's some beauty in that as well, and some goodness in that, is being able to walk away from a conversation with somebody and then go, huh, I want to talk to you about that again, or let's keep talking about that. Um, and them not be in a classroom, right? So
Yes. And so can you talk about what you're doing now, and a little bit about, your division, your unit has its own history and prestige to it. So how would you describe, coming out of West Point, what's your responsibility? Where are you? Those sorts of things.
yeah. Yep. So in the 101st Airborne Division right now, I'm doing my field grade time aviator. So I'm serving in the aviation brigade, the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade, Destiny. And I'm essentially responsible for the administration and logistics of a staff that supports about 500 soldiers on a day-to-day basis as my small part of the Destiny Brigade. And so that coupled with obviously I've got to fly and maintain my currency there, and my proficiency is what I do on a daily basis. Yeah, but the history of this division is absolutely. I mean, a lot of people, you think Band of Brothers. That's probably what most of your listeners would be familiar with. Dick Winters, and Easy Company, World War II, and I'll tell you, though the Aviation Brigade wasn't around back there in World War II, it certainly made a name for itself as well. And we like to say that the 101st Combat Aviation Brigade is the most sought after aviation brigade in the Army, but really in the world. And there's a lot that we can bring to bear, more so than most other aviation units, and it really is an honor to serve in the 101st Aviation Brigade. Just given all the history, you talk about Vietnam, you talk about the Gulf War, taking out radar systems across enemy lines, those kinds of things, the global war on terrorism, and just the amount of service and sacrifice that folks that have worn the uniform before me with that patch on their left shoulder, much less on their right, which means you've deployed to a combat zone with them, is the significance there. It's just great, and I'm definitely humbled. I'm just around a tremendous amount of talented, exceptionally talented and committed and driven humans every single day. So it makes the job really easy when everybody around you really cares about what they do.
Yeah. I know that you're running out of time, but you mentioned that there have been only like a handful of times where you've needed to sort of
Mm,
apply all these skills. Can you give like one example of, hey, this
mm.
is where your training, your knowledge, the philosophy you learned, the critical thinking skills, all this came to a head and your training showed up when it needed to show up? Have there been any examples like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's getting deep, but that's the point. Yeah. My deployment to Afghanistan in 2013, 2014, um, was particularly kinetic, is what we would say. I was a lieutenant, and I mean, to keep it as unclassified as I could say, there was a lot there was a lot of death, right? Um, Not of our folks, but a lot of decisions being made in a particular place where we were in Afghanistan. Um, I ran assault operations in the Helmand for a little bit, and then in central Afghanistan in the mountains. And I think the example that I would talk about is actually about the missions we didn't do. And I remember um, we were having a few missions a night, our company, for a couple months. It was very, very busy. And we gotten some imagery on this guy that the ground force that we were supporting was supposed to be getting. And we were talking about the intelligence related to that. I looked at the picture and I just remember thinking like, how could we possibly identify this person? Like, this looks like something off of a 16-bit Sega Genesis. And we're about to go out here and do this mission. And we think it's super, super important. It's a time sensitive mission. Oh, we're going to get that. The intelligence was so limited. And so I remember we had a conversation. There was a conversation that we had with the ground force commander, our senior pilot had with him, and then some of the task force level command team that was above me. Of, hey, I don't know that we're comfortable going out and do this. Like we've got to have a little more. The non-decision or the decision to not pursue something when we were 6 months into a deployment where this had become routine, and you're spring loaded to absolutely, right? Like aviators, we exist to support a ground force commander. That's Army Aviation in particular, and that's the difference in mission set from the Air Force, right, is typically focused on the strategic level missions, and in Army Aviation kind of made its way by supporting the ground force commander, and so you're spring loaded to yes, we're going to support. But the fact that the people in that room, not just me, had enough wherewithal, particularly when that December we had lost 6 folks on a mission from one of our sister companies. And emotionally, all you want to do is just get out there and get after it. But enough wherewithal to stop and still critically think about, what are we doing? The way we're describing this objective and this individual, this is somebody that we got to get. But if we have such low confidence, and everybody in this room has such low confidence that we are even going to the right place to get this person, and if all we're doing is saying, hey, we're walking away with somebody tonight, is that, like, should we be doing this? And we did. And to me, that's something that's stuck with me, right? Is I said at the very beginning, you get paid to think critically, and it's not just about in the heat of the moment. It's about when you got a few moments to think about it. What are you gonna do? And so, yeah, I was very appreciative that there were people around me as a young officer that were willing to exemplify that it is okay to sit back and go, yeah, we'll give it a day. Let's see if we can get some more information.
Yeah,
And
wow.
ultimately, I didn't fly that mission, but a few days later, they got some information, and it was better, and they were able to go do what they needed to do. But yeah.
Little did I know, I mean, when we were sitting in those seminar rooms, the kinds of background experience that you were bringing to a lot of those discussions. And yeah, it's good to hear some of these things now and go, okay, yeah, and putting some things together from our experience and gives a little bit more color to it. Because yeah, you're right. I mean, during COVID, like we didn't get a lot of time. Your program was it 2 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so there wasn't a lot of, but I'm immensely grateful for the experience that we did have. It was awesome being in those seminars, hanging out on the weekends sometimes and talking philosophy and how are we going to get through this and that sort of thing. And I just I think the world is a better place because someone like you is keeping watch. And I mean, for me, someone who's been interested in this topic, seeing how this applies in a way that I just wouldn't think about in the first place, it's just been, at least to me, like fascinating. So really appreciate, I mean, the perspective that you bring, keeping us safe, your service. Couldn't be more grateful for you taking the time and also just doing what you do.
Well, hey, I appreciate you, Jared. I appreciate you thinking of me to come on here and talk, and I hope it's helpful for folks that are out there to see and trust that the military is. We do inculcate a culture of intellectual rigor in what we do, much more than a lot of people realize, um, and uh, and we're willing to put ourselves through the ringer to get things as right as we can, as often as we can. And I think the last thing I would say is anything that I've talked about that's had to do that's had to do with me is not necessarily is not unique to me. Right. I'm just one person. There's so many folks that have experienced the same thing. Um, just hundreds and hundreds of them. And as I said, unfortunately, I've only had to experience those things a handful of times. So, but I am very fortunate that I've had this path to go teach and study philosophy and meet people like you, Jared, who challenge me and inspire me in ways to want to be a little better every day. So yeah, super thankful.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Well, like I said, we'll have to do this again sometime. Give us an update on what can we expect from you in the next like few years or so. Are you sort of on the path right now, good to go for like a few years, or is there a what's next? And maybe it's 10 years or 15 years,
Yeah.
or maybe it's just unknown.
Oh yeah. Man, Michelle and I talk about that all the time. Right. So, yeah, I think I've got quite a lot of steam left in me in terms of the military. I'll hit 20 years later this year of time in, but I could see myself doing another 10. I still feel really young. Um, I really love what I do, and I mean that it challenges me in all the best ways, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So, yeah, I hope I'm doing this for another decade. I am at the point in my career where, you know, every couple years you kind of just find out if you're still are you still doing the thing or is it time for you to retire? So I think I'll find out in the next 2 years or so whether or not I've got that other decade here in front of me. So we'll be
Awesome.
praying about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Jon Thompson, thanks for doing what you do.
Yeah. Well, hey, I appreciate it, Jared. You have a good one. We'll do it again soon.